Very good evening to all of you once again. I'm ever so thankful that you all could join me every time, every day. We left off in 2 Samuel 13 with the assassination of Amnon, the crown prince of Israel, David's firstborn son, at the hands of the servants of Absalom for the rape of Absalom's sister Tamar at the hands of Amnon. We now pick up with 2 Samuel 14. Absalom has fled to his grandfather's palace, or at least his kingdom in Geshur, which is about 70 miles from Jerusalem. We pick up now in verse 1. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. Remember, Joab is the nephew of David. He's the chief general of his army. Very mighty man of war. And he looks upon his king, David, and he notices that David is missing his son, Absalom. You have to think, he lost two sons in one day. One to death and one to fleeing in fear for his life from King David himself, his father, no less. And Joab sent to Tekoa, and fetched thence a wise woman, and said unto her, I pray thee, feign thyself to be a mourner, and put on now mourning apparel, and anoint thyself with oil, but be as a woman that had a long time mourned for the dead. Now here's Tekoa. It is south. Right here would be Jerusalem. It is south of Jerusalem. Here's Bethlehem. And Joab tells this woman to put on mourning clothes and come to David, and come to the king, and speak on this manner unto him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. And when the woman of Tekoa spake to the king, she fell on her face to the ground, and did obeisance, and said, Help, O king. And the king said unto her, What aileth thee? And she answered, I am indeed a widow woman, and mine husband is dead. And thy handmaid had two sons, and they two strove together in the field, and there was none to part them, but the one smote the other, and slew him. And behold, the whole family is risen against thine handmaid. And they said, Deliver him that smote his brother, that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom he slew, and we will destroy the heir also. And so they shall quench my coal which is left, and shall not leave to my husband neither name nor remainder upon the earth. So this woman, she comes to David at the behest of Joab, his nephew, and she tells him this story that is, her husband's dead. She only has two sons. They're both in the field. One son kills the other because they got mad. Kills the other, and now, because of the Avenger of Blood law, the family rises up and desire to avenge the blood of the fallen brother. And the woman says, if they kill the one alive, though he did commit the crime, but if they kill him, there'll be no one left to carry on my husband's name. She is wanting his life to be spared. And the king said unto the woman, Go to thine house, and I will go give charge concerning thee. And the woman of Tekoa said unto the king, My lord, O king, the iniquity be upon me and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless. What she's meaning is, if you don't fulfill the law concerning this matter, meaning sparing my one remaining son, she says, if you don't do that, then let the guilt be upon me for this breaking of the law. She says, don't trouble yourself on my behalf. And the king said, Whosoever saith aught unto thee, bring him to me, and he shall not touch thee any more. Then she said, I pray thee, let the king remember the Lord thy God, that thou wouldest not suffer the revengers of blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. And he said, As the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of thy son fall to the earth. David just spoke out of his own mouth the very thing that Joab wanted to hear. Then the woman said, Let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak one word unto my lord the king. And he said, Say on. And the woman said, Wherefore then hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God? For the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty, and that the king doth not fetch home again his banished. This is a very courageous woman. Hence the reason why Joab wanted the wise woman from Tekoa, because he knew that she knew how to speak. She wasn't afraid of telling the truth. Probably an older lady. And men would not have said such a thing to David. She says, "Wherefore then hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God?" She's talking about Israel and how Israel, they love Absalom. And no doubt the murder of Amnon, the crown prince, has spread throughout the kingdom. It's been 3 years since Absalom has been in the nation of Israel, and the people miss him. We're told he's the most handsome fella in the whole land, probably very charismatic, and they also heard about how he avenged the rape of his sister Tamar. And you get the feeling that Amnon was not a very popular prince. But Absalom is loved within the kingdom. "For the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty." She says, in so many words, she's saying, you kind of look like a hypocrite here, David. And that the king doth not fetch home again his banished. I think that Adam Clarke said it best concerning this matter. Talking about David, "He is willing to pardon the meanest of his subjects, the murder of a brother at the instance of a poor woman. And he is not willing to pardon his son Absalom, whose restoration to favor is the desire of the whole nation of Israel." So he's willing to spare this lawbreaker, murderer's life because of this poor woman. Yet his own soul is crushed because of Absalom, and he's not willing to pardon Absalom as far as going back and trying to restore the relationship. But I do believe that the commentators had it right whenever they said there is also something about the reason why Joab wants to reunite the two, David and Absalom. He sees the favor that Absalom has with the people of Israel. He also knows that he is, as I said, about 70 miles away. It's quite a little distance to the northeast. But he would rather keep an eye on the successor to the throne, because you have to remember, Israel has not been a nation with kings but just a few decades now. They're not like the other nations around them where there's been centuries built up. No, this king thing is still relatively new. So he's wishing to keep the throne of David intact by also keeping an eye on his son Absalom. And he has very good reason to be concerned, as we learn very soon. "For we must needs die, and are as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again," the woman says to David. "Neither doth God respect any person, yet doth he devise means that his banished be not expelled from him." This is one of the most fascinating verses in all the Old Testament. This one single verse. First, she brings up the need that David has of reconciling with his son. And she says, "For we must needs die and are as water spilt on the ground." She says this earthly life is very, very short. And the longer that you let this thing linger, the more regret that you're going to have, the worse it's going to be, which cannot be gathered up again. "Neither doth God respect any person." She says, just because you're a king after God's own heart does not mean that you'll live forever down here, David. You're going to die the exact same way as the rest of us. But then the most fascinating part of this verse, "Yet doth he devise," speaking of God, "yet doth he devise means that his banished be not expelled from him." How correct she is. The Old Testament very plainly tells us that without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. And who gave their blood upon the cross? God himself. He does make a way so that the banished, which we all are, separated from him, he does make a way for us to be reconciled to him. And she's giving that example to David, and she says, does not even God do this with us? Now therefore that I am come to speak of this thing unto my lord the king, it is because the people have made me afraid. And thy handmaid said, I will now speak unto the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his handmaid. She's speaking of her family making her afraid of what's going to happen. So she says, I'm going to come to the king, and perhaps he'll be as an angel of God to me and have mercy. For the king will hear to deliver his handmaid out of the hand of the man that would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. Then thine handmaid said, the word of my lord the king shall now be comfortable, for as an angel of God, so is my lord the king to discern good and bad. Therefore the Lord thy God will be with thee. Then the king answered and said unto the woman, hide not from me, I pray thee, the thing that I shall ask thee. And the woman said, let my lord the king now speak. And the king said, is not the hand of Joab with thee in all this? And the woman answered and said, as thy soul liveth, my lord the king, none can turn to the right hand or to the left from aught that my lord the king hath spoken. For thy servant Joab, he bade me, and he put all these words in the mouth of thine handmaid. So David, he had his suspicions that Joab put her up to this. To fetch about this form of speech hath thy servant Joab done this thing, and my lord is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel of God, to know all things that are in the earth. And the king said unto Joab, behold now, I have done this thing. Go therefore, bring the young man Absalom again. So this worked, what Joab had set up. It worked. He's going to go and get Absalom, and he wants to reconcile unto him, but he only partially does it, to his own detriment, no doubt. And Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. And Joab said, today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my lord, O king, and that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. I do agree with the commentators that I think that it's much more than just Joab wants David's heart to be fulfilled, made whole, if you will. He's wanting to keep an eye on Absalom, because a rebellion could easily begin up here in Geshur and come all the way down and take the throne. Well, it happens anyway. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. Once again, right here is Jerusalem, and all the way up here would be Absalom with his grandfather. And the king said, let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face. This would be for 2 years. For 2 years after he returned, making it 5 years total. Whenever the first two last spoke in person, David blessed Absalom. It was a very good meeting. Absalom was actually inviting him to the feast in which he planned to kill his brother Amnon. But he was inviting the king to the feast during the sheep shearing months. And David refused to go, but he did bless him. It was actually a good way to end their last talk for 5 years. But David still harbors a little bit of bitterness against Absalom. Else he wouldn't have had him come all the way back and then wait 2 whole years before seeing him again. But in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot even to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. The people of Israel, initially crowned King Saul because he was a very handsome fella, very tall. And right here we see a similar case where Absalom he's a handsome man, young, charismatic, probably got a good name, good reputation. If they didn't like Amnon, then him having Amnon killed would have actually exalted him even further in the kingdom, ironically. And when he pulled his hair, for it was at every year's end that he pulled it, because the hair was heavy on him, therefore he pulled it. He weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight. This would have been about 5 pounds of hair a year. That's a lot. And I know some people that can do that. They can just grow a vast amount of hair. And I know some people can't grow any. But it's 5 pounds, and he loves his hair, apparently, because he doesn't keep it's only once a year that he cuts it. He only cuts it because it's too heavy for him. But come to find out, the very pride that he has in his hair is the destruction of him. And unto Absalom there were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of a fair countenance. So Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem and saw not the king's face. Therefore Absalom sent for Joab to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him, and when he sent again the second time, he would not come. So Absalom is trying to get in touch with his father David. He has still not spoken to David. This kind of aggravated me a little bit. It's like, well, I mean, if David really forgave him, why is he letting this linger, this festering anger that Absalom obviously still has? And we'll read about that in the next verse. Therefore Absalom said unto his servants, See, Joab's field is near mine, and he hath barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire in order to get Joab's attention. Proverbs 29:22 writes this, An angry man stirreth up strife, and a furious man aboundeth in transgression. I believe this. I think that Absalom has become very much unhinged. First his anger was directed against Amnon, so he has Amnon killed. And now it's directed much more at David and Joab for ignoring him. And there's something about being ignored. Especially whenever you feel the kind of privilege that Absalom or any prince does naturally. So he's being ignored. And he, by all rights, I suppose you could say, is the crown prince. If Kileab is dead, then he is next in line to be king. I don't know how the assassination of Amnon would fit into all of this, but with David's forgiveness, surely that would still be held intact, which David does forgive him. We see here a toxicity brewing within Absalom that is going unchecked by the house of David, by David himself, which is making it 10,000 times worse, and also by Joab. There is something just so very crucial about keeping communication with family, loved ones, spouses, friends, children, sons, daughters, whatever, parents. At marriage.com, the top 10 reasons for divorce is given. Number 1 is infidelity. People get divorced because one of them cheats on another or whatever. Number 2 is because of money, sadly. And number 3 is lack of communication. I really like the subtext right here. It says communication is crucial in marriage, and not being able to communicate effectively quickly leads to, listen to this, lack of communication quickly leads to resentment and frustration for both, impacting all aspects. Okay, now I know what you're saying. It's just marriage. Well, it's two people with a bond. And these tips for how to have a good relationship with one's children, especially teenagers and up. That's what these notes are dealing with. I thought that these were also very interesting. Number 1, stop what you're doing and focus on the moment. Even for just a few seconds, give your child your full attention. There is none of that happening between David and Absalom. Look at your child while he's talking to you. Really listen to what he's saying. This sends the message that what he has to say is important to you. David's not listening to him at all. Show interest. Encourage your child to expand on what he's saying and explore his views, opinions, feelings, expectations, or plans. None of that's happening. Listen without judging or correcting. David's not listening to a word of him. Just be there. This may be the only one that David has partially correct, and he's still not available. So it's really, he doesn't even have this one. Just be there. For example, you might be in the kitchen when your child is in his bedroom. Teenagers benefit just from knowing that you're available. David's not available at all. He can't even get into the palace to see his dad. This would have made me have said, why did I even have to come back to Jerusalem? I should have just stayed in Geshur. just insane. Once again, I believe that Joab was wanting to keep an eye on David, and David is doing something. I fully believe this, that David is just wanting the thought that his son, whom he does still love, going a weird way about it right at this moment, but but at the same time, he still loves his son, but there's still that little bit of bitterness there. Neither one of them's really wanting to break through that wall. And David is doing what most dads do, sadly, that I've seen at least. And that is, I want to keep them in my vicinity and make sure they're still alive. I want to keep them safe, bring them there. But at the same time, they don't want to talk to them about anything. They don't want to be too emotional. It's kind of like Hank Hill and Bobby. It's like Hank has no interest whatsoever in being alone with Bobby. He doesn't want to talk to him at all, on King of the Hill. And and Bobby's trying to make these connections with him, and Hank's just, I was thinking about the one quote the other day. Bobby tells Hank, he says, "Why do you hate what you don't understand?" And Hank says, "I don't hate you, Bobby."
Bobby, I didn't think I'd ever need to tell you this, but I would be a bad parent if I didn't. Soccer was invented by European ladies to keep them busy while their husbands did the cooking.
Why do you have to hate what you don't understand?
I don't hate you, Bobby.
I meant soccer.
Oh, yeah, I hate soccer, yes.
Dads do this an awful lot. They neglect the crucial issue at hand with their children, and they feel like as long as their children are still alive, still healthy, then they're all right. Well, life has so much more to do than just living. There's so much more to life than living. That's why people commit suicide, because they see death as preferable to living because of what happens while they're alive. Very healthy people kill themselves, at least physically. But this anger in Absalom has festered for now years. And I also believe that he was angry at David for not punishing Amnon to begin with. I believe that still was somewhere in there. So we see him, this builds and builds and builds. He grows more and more resentful and frustrated with the situation with his father. He's also feeling ignored at this point. So now he goes and he burns the field of Joab's, burns it. We hear about psychopaths burning houses, and the same behavior is being exhibited by Absalom at this point. And it's usually at these serial killers, they find links between how they had such a toxic connection with their family, their parents. So I do believe that it's the wildfire that's grown up inside of Absalom is starting to actually play out in actual fires now. This is a dangerous man to be around. And with the kind of influence that he is no doubt getting at this time from the people of Israel, it's very, very dangerous. Then Joab arose and came to Absalom unto his house, and said unto him, Wherefore have thy servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, Behold, I sent unto thee, saying, Come hither, that I may send thee to the king, to say, Wherefore am I come from Geshur? It had been good for me to have been there still. Now therefore let me see the king's face, and if there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. This shows how there is no remorse from Absalom for what he had done to Amnon. This shows in this very verse. He says, And if there be any iniquity in me, let David have me executed. He fully believes that he's in the right. Psychopaths usually do that too. They usually feel like they're in the right. I'm not really saying that he is a psychopath, even though he has many traits. He shares in many of those same traits as psychopaths. But the barley fire does work. Joab, he does go try to intercede for the both of them. So Joab came to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. A lot of the commentators hated the fact that David kissed him. One of them actually said he should have kicked him. I mean, I don't think so. I got to thinking about this. I don't think they would have done. I believe that David did the only thing that he could do at that point, but it's too little, too late. Absalom, he already has this growing resentment, frustration, embittered, wanting some type of power now. You know, he's had years now to contemplate on what he would do being the successor to the throne of Israel, because he is now, with David kissing him and forgiving him, he is now reinstated as the successor to the throne. We don't hear anything about Gilead. Amnon's dead, so Absalom is the prince, the crown prince. So you know that those thoughts have been in there ticking away. In my opinion, I don't think that Absalom has any more of a genuine connection to David than that of Brutus had with Caesar at the end. Brutus, he was close to Caesar. While Caesar was rising in power, he actually aided him in many different ways. At the very end, he was one of them with the knife, literally stabbing it into the back of Caesar. And we see how Absalom does the same thing to his father David. They may have been all right, but now I believe it's just too little, too late. This guy's already setting fires to fields. He's already killed his brother, his successor to the throne. He's popular in Israel. Perfect circumstances to just be an outright rebellion, as we will learn very soon, Lord willing. But that is the lesson for today. I hope that you all learned something. Lord of peace be with you all. Amen.